I'm Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. This is a podcast episode brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. Welcome back to our Bamidbar series titled Community Between Order and Chaos, where we've been exploring the gap between the vision for community laid out in Bamidbar and the real-life challenges that are presented to this order throughout its unfolding chapters. Each week, I've been partnering with communal leaders from around the globe to explore these themes. We've been hearing about different challenges in their communities and responses, as well as our usual deep dive into these themes in the Parsha. At the end of today's podcast, I'll share some summary thoughts about this series, so stay tuned until the end of today's episode. Now is the time to contact me about sponsoring a Devarim podcast. You can reach me at podcast@matan.org.il or contact the Matan office directly. Parshat Matot is comprised of three clear topical sections. First, it opens with the laws of oaths, with particular focus on how they operate differently for women. It then continues with the war against Midian, which is the fulfillment of the commandment to wage war against them several chapters earlier. From this war, we ultimately learn many laws concerning vessel purity and impurity, as well as the Torah's approach to spoils of war. The third and final section of the Parsha focuses on the request of Reuven, Gad, and Chetzi Menashe to remain in the Transjordan. They conduct a tense dialogue with Moshe and eventually reach a compromise agreed upon by both sides. Matot-Masei, because this is a double parsha, opens with the list of the nation's travels and their landmarks in the wilderness. Aaron dies in this week's parsha as well, and war is fought against Arad. The latter section of the parsha details laws pertaining to entry and conquest of Israel, such as the commandment to inhabit the land, the borders of Canaan, and another commandment to create Levitic cities and cities of refuge, and concludes with the legal application of Tzelofchad's daughter's inheritance. That will be in the focus of today's episode. The parsha continues with its opening tone. It is one filled with transition from one generation to the next, and with laws that help the nation transition into their new life in Israel. My guest for today is Rabbi Dina Najman, who is the founding rabbi of the Kehillah of Riverdale. Prior to this pulpit, Rabbi Najman was the Marta D'Atra, the spiritual and halachic leader of the Orthodox Minyan, Kehillat Orach Eliezer in Manhattan for 8 years. She is the head of the Gemara department at SAR Academy and has been educating students there for over a decade. She serves on the board of the Halachic Organ Donor Society and was the education committee chair for the Aguna Task Force. She presently serves on the board of Uri L'Tzedek and the advisory board of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. Rabbi Dina Najman, it is an honor to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Yosef.
So before we jump into our episode today, which is really going to focus on the story of Bnot Tzelofchad, I just want to set the stage a little bit for our listeners, okay? And remind everyone that we're now recording for Parshiot Matot-Masei, but the story actually happens in two acts, right? The first act appears in Parshat Pinchas, where we have the actual, right? Vatikravna benot Tzelofchad ben Chefer ben Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe mishpachot Menashe v'chulei v'chulei, that they, the 5 daughters, go up and they, of course, try and claim the inheritance that they believe is duly theirs. And there we have the interaction between them and Moshe not knowing what the law is, and then the reaction and the ruling that's given by God. The second part of the story takes place in our parsha, and I'm sure you're going to get into this question: why split it up into parts? Why end the sefer like this? Right? These are all really significant questions, and it starts the exact same way, right? Vayikirvu rashei ha'avot lemishpachot bnei Gilad. Now we have sort of like the male counterpoints that now come close, that approach Moshe, trying to figure out this issue of if the women inherit and if the women marry out of the tribe, then what happens to the land that they've inherited? And so we sort of go into another outgrowth of this law that has been adjudicated a few prakim before. So the story is split up into two, and I kind of just want to invite you to jump into this narrative wherever it sort of feels right for the conversation that we're going to have today.
Wonderful. So again, thank you, Yosefa, for having me. And it's an honor to learn on this beautiful podcast venue. And I just wanted to mention before I get started that the learning is Leilei Nishmat Imi Morati Shifra Bela Bat Yisrael Yitzchak V'Sara Rivka Zichrona Livracha. And the reason this means a great deal, as we'll talk about, is because my mother exemplified advocacy for Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and Torah Yisrael. And therefore, it's quite meaningful and fitting that I dedicate her in her memory.
Amen. Thank you.
My answer to you, just to talk about why it's necessary to have these two placements, I believe it's really to inspire the people. Just to put it out there, it's to be machazek the people. First in Pinchas, remember what is surrounding the narrative of Pinchas. The people are counted once again, and they're ready to enter the land, right? There's a reinstatement, another reinstatement actually, before the first Benot Tzelofchad, and that reinstatement is Yoshua and Kalev have been promised that they are given their steadfast allegiance to Hashem and the belief that we can conquer the land. Benot Tzelofchad is going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And that seems like an extra textual narrative that we don't need here, but it's present here. Then you get Benot Tzelofchad. Then what comes right after that? The smicha of Yehoshua comes right after it. What we're doing in Pinchas at that point is really, right, there was a counting. We are ready to go. And it's kind of like, let's backtrack all the way to the beginning of Amidbar. We are getting ourselves ready to go into the land of Israel right now. And we're setting ourselves up. These people can go. This is who remains. Yoshua and Kalev are a part of those people who can go in. The children are going to go in. We already know from the previous Parsha that our great leaders of Miriam and then Aaron and then Moshe Rabbeinu, they're not going to go in. But we are going to have Yoshua and Kalev. They've been promised because they care about the land that they're going to go in. We now meet individuals who have a certain confidence in the mission to enter the land. So much so that they're planning for their Yerusha. It's interesting, after the spies, and I'm not going to really touch upon that so much, but if you notice, after the Chet Meraglim, very shortly after, we learn about the mitzvah of Challah. And when we learn about the mitzvah of Challah, that actually gives a certain, I would say, nechama to the parents. That when you go in to the land, right, you will be giving Challah. It's not going to be them. It's going to be your children. So here, again, we are told, you are going in, this is what's going to happen. You have accounting. Benot Tzelofchad, the children, they are going to go in. And when we go in, and we can go in, because we have that can-do of Yehoshua and Kalev ringing in Alona Aleh in our ears, now we see that we're going to be able to go into the land. So if anything, Benot Tzelofchad are strategically placed here to have advocates for going in there. Then, the second time, the repetition, when does that take place? What happens in Matot-Masei, and I would just say Masei at the very end. Well, no, we can bring it together. The people are traveling. We're going over the travels that they've had. And we recall the narrative of Reuven, Gad, and Chetzi Shevet Menashe. Yet another little blip. Unlike the other situations of Reuven, Gad, and Chetzi Shevet Menashe, what do we see? We see people who are part of the community, but they're making a request. Their request is, I want to stay in the Transjordan. We want to stay in the Transjordan region. We don't want to go in. Moshe actually has a heroic, amazing response here. And his response is, and this is, I have to say, influenced by one of Nechama Leibowitz's students, Debbie Sondheim, who taught me this in the text, and I think it's really incredible. If you look at the text itself, you don't have to look at anything. What are they asking for? Their focus is mikneh. Everything they're doing is mikneh, and we'll build us and our kids and our wives and our kids, right? Mikneh. We want to stay there because of our mikneh, because of the wealth, because of what we want to have. If you look at the Pesukim, how does Moshe respond? Without saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to fall on my face. What are they doing now? What does Moshe say? well, and he changes the sentence structure and he says, well, for your what? Your tough and your nashim and your mikneh. You'll have something for your mikneh. They don't even ask. They are making a claim what's their priority. And Moshe Rabbeinu saying, your priority is to your people, to your family, and to your people, not your mikneh. And they are forgetting the priority of going. And then he makes a very clear claim, you will get this, but you are fighting alongside your people to go into the land. Following that, and that was a real wonderful response that Moshe Rabbeinu does. And keep in mind, this is Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. Half of Menashe is involved in this. Who's Benot Tzelofchad?
Very nice.
Benot Tzelofchad is from Menashe. Now we have to reinstate what part of the land, where do they want to be? Benot Tzelofchad very much wants to be in Eretz Yisrael proper. And therefore, this merits yet another conversation. And that commitment to the land needs to be solidified. That chizuk and that passion, the chizuk for inheritance or going into the land may have been not 100% recognized and appreciated. Before it was a halachic matter. Am I going to get inheritance? Yes. Now, the passion that Benot Tzelofchad has. And you can talk about that the men come forward and others want to talk about where am I going to be. And I think that's true. But there's something within Benot Tzelofchad themselves that they're mentioned by name once again. Each one of them. It recalibrates for the people what their priorities need to be as they're standing at the brink of the Yarden to go in.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're inspiring the men of their family. Meaning, we don't know which men wanted what thing, right? But in theory, by the way, by the way you're presenting it, is that they've sort of like raised up the spirit of the Menashe clans and saying, no, this is something that we want. And as you said, the people are the priority. We're not here talking about our cattle. We're here talking about where our families are going to be living. And I think also,
the Psukim, they say that too. You notice that they're coming back again, once again.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a positive subversion of that request of God and Menashe. In that's a really beautiful reading, and it two things came up for me in my mind as you were sharing that. One is that, in the midrash that you brought I know it from the midrash about how the mitzvah of Parshat Chalaz comes as sort of a real comfort for Am Yisrael after that. And I think even just the passion of Benot Tzelofchad, meaning the emphasis that they're the daughters of. Now, excuse me for bringing it into our modern reality for a moment, but one of the things that has been the most moving in what's happened in Israel in the past, I don't even know how many months anymore, is that everybody has been moved by the passion of the younger generation who they really underestimated their capabilities. And it's stuff like the younger generations who are like in the army, et cetera, or right after, who are losing more of their immediate peers, who have been sort of like holding up emotionally the parent generations. And it really reminds me of that sometimes we underestimate how much the younger people can actually end up carrying sometimes the in this case, the pain and grief, but in this case, even just the mission that the older generation, in this case in the Midbar, was unable to carry forward. So that was just one thought that came up from what you were saying. Also, is that I do think that there's something really moving about the portrait of women that we have here, not only because they obviously are showing everybody that they get what's sitting at the kishkas of everything they're supposed to be about at this point in history, but the last time we met women was in this very negative context of Benot Moav. And I also feel that the women of Benot Tzelofchad, they're not only sort of presenting like, this is what the women of Israel should be like, but they're also presenting, a whole other value that women, and I agree with you, all humans should have to their nation, which is that they're patriotic, which is that they're dedicated to their mission and their land, and they're not just there to like seduce other people into sin. So I feel like just because these stories are intertwined in the same series, I think that that's also something that's meaningful. But really the piece about how they really bring everybody else up, I think is really coming to mind for me as you're speaking.
I think you can say that for sure. I think that
there's also a way to see them as individuals because they have their names alongside Yehoshua and Kalev. So I that's why I also liked that. We'll go back to why I see them as individuals, but I do not want to dissociate them from Benot Moab, and I think you are correct. I think that literary sensitivity, I think, is really excellent. So yeah, I think
It's like
that
these are
juxtaposition is
our
great.
daughters. Our daughters are the ones that
These
are fighting for
daughters.
all the things that really matter.
Daughters.
Yeah.
These are, yeah. So I just want to, along the lines of the first thing that you said, because you say the younger generation carry, it's a great piggybacking in what I wanted to mention next, which is still along the lines of the names of Benot Tzlavchad. How are they described? Benot Tzlavchad, Ben Chefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, Lemishpachat Menashe, Ben Yosef. And there's a very famous Rashi on that. Did we really need to mention, right, that Tzlavchad was from Yosef? Obviously, if I say Menashe, it's from Yosef. Didn't we know that? But the mentioning of Yosef made our antennas go up. Yosef tells his brothers, Ve'alitem et atzmotai, carry my bones from here. Don't leave them in Mitzrayim. And Yosef knew. Wasn't necessarily going to be his brothers. Who's going to be the next generation? I love what you said, Yosef. Yosef. I love that. His bones, perfect. His bones were carried and schlepped through the desert because it was critical to Yosef, as it was for his father Yaakov, that they would continue to be a part of the land promised to Avram, even when no longer alive. Yosef didn't give up on that mission, even though he was going to be dying in Egypt. He loved the land. And so too said Rashi, but Tzlavchad loved the land. And this is a familial love. This Shevet, or Menashe from Yosef, it's a familial love of the land that served to positively influence a people concerned about their capacity to capture the land and have success in their homeland. These women, Benot Tzlavchad, the way they come together in their unified voice, this collective voice of Benot Tzlavchad, of Machla, Noach, Hagla, Milka, and Tirza, they come together with a united purpose. The Orach Chaim, Reb Chaim ben Alter, says something very critical. He says, Shalom amdu lifnei Moshe. When they came, they have that wisdom, he mentions that. But they didn't come before Moshe until they consulted with each other. Ad shehit vadu yachad be'etza haguna v'ra'u ki yesh b'fiyem nechona b'taina hanishma'at. They consulted together. They had a suitable plan, and they saw that they had a sound claim. And even more, there's an Etziv that says, Yehuda Berlin, that pay attention to the language. They came lifnei Moshe, v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen, and lifnei HaNesiim. You could have said lifnei Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen v'Nesiim. But he said they came, so one spoke before Moshe, but it really was as if one before Elazar, one before, they all were equal, albeit her own voice, because they were all individuals, but they advocated equally. And this advocacy, unlike other groups who maybe complained, like what we saw with Korach, remember how they came. There wasn't a unity. It was an Eda and a Kahal in the third person. It's not personal. His tactic is oppositional. But Benot Tzlavchad are sensitive to any connection or perception of rebellion and challenge to Moshe's authority. They even say that. They say, my father is not from this. They take great pains to emphasize that their father, and by associating their family, had nothing to do with Korach's rebellion. And this is the Torah itself will distinguish between the way that Korach approaches Moshe and the way Benot Tzlavchad do. Remember the word that they use, vayakumu. They arose for Korach and his group. That's how Korach got up. They stood. It's like almost like you can imagine they hovered with a mission of opposition. There was this taint of arrogance. But Vatikrovna Benot Tzlavchad, with Benot Tzlavchad, they come close. There's humility. They need to present their case. The use of the verb karo, kuf resh vet, means to come close, like a korban, strengthening one's bond to God. So too here they do this.
And this is reminiscent of those who were tameim, ritually impure, and could not offer the Korban Pesach earlier on in Sefer Bamidbar, in Baal Lodcha. They approached Moshe and Aaron in Perek Tet, Pasuk Vav. If you remember, Vayikravu, they come close. They approach Moshe with the intention of also coming closer to God, to be a part of Am Yisrael, not to be excluded from the entire nation during the Korban Pesach. So when we use Vatikrovna with Benot Tzelofchad, it's likened to that of those who are interested in offering the Korban Pesach. This request was L'Shem Shamayim, and for inclusion in Am Yisrael, each person, woman, man, everyone, Tamei, Ta'or, right? How can we see and celebrate the Korban Pesach? They were talking about the Benot Tzelofchad were talking about Eretz Yisrael. And together they were all talking about it in the context of Halacha and Torah Yisrael. So with the Korban Pesach, the Torah says that Moshe Vayomer Aleihem Moshe Im Duveshma Ma Yitzaveh Hashem Lachem. Stand, I'm going to hear or understand what Hashem will command you. However, in Parshat Pinchas, even Moshe employs, he learned something. He employs the same verb that was used for Benot Tzelofchad, Kuf Reish Vet. Vayakrev Moshe et Mishpatam Lifnei Hashem. Moshe brings their cause close as he allows this case to come close, to approach God. And both times, even though Moshe doesn't know the answer, he appreciates the question. Both times, he wants it to be honored and set down as halacha when he gets the answer from Hashem. And now we'll bring in Yosef one more time. Benot Tzelofchad, as we said, were likened to their ancestor Yosef, who yearned for Eretz Yisrael and desired to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And that was so paramount to the people who were carrying the bones also. What do we say? They say, why were these people tamei when they were talking about with the Pesach Sheni, the individuals who asked to offer a Korban Pesach? They were tamei nefesh, we say, because they carried the bones of Yosef. They saw that importance, so important, that Eretz Yisrael was so important for Yosef and for the next generation that partaking in the Korban Pesach at the designated time. But they still said, we're doing something. We're doing something for the Yam. We're carrying Yosef's body. And they don't complain about the tasks. They merely request that given their predicament of being Tamei Mate, by carrying the Aron on behalf of the nation, both to fulfill Yosef's will and to serve as a reminder to the focus needed to enter into the land of Israel, they still ought to be treated as part of the nation.
So I really love that point, because throughout all these conversations, and it's really just reflective of what's actually, of course, being spoken about throughout the book of Bamidbar, we're dealing with this question of how do you create a community? Like, what are those boundaries? What does that look like? And one of those questions is who's in and who's out. And as you said, we have these cases, whether it's the Tmeim or definitely Benot Tzelofchad, and I think that there are also other cases that we've mentioned along the way, of people who sort of against their will, or right, not because they chose to, they're not able to be there. And I think that one of the biggest questions that Sefer Bamidbar calls upon us to think about, whether it's within only a religious community or other kinds of communities, are who are the people that won't be able to participate in this moment, activity, service, but they would like to be there, and how are we able to include them? And it comes up in all different kinds of examples, like when people in the extreme example of it was Corona, and it's Leila said there, and how do we help people have that experience if they're alone, right? That's like an extreme example, but I think a very related one to the examples you brought now. But and interestingly, in Sefer Bamidbar, we also spoke about in a different earlier episode, the Nazir or the Nazira, essentially, who's someone who chooses to be on the out. But not because, they're physically included, but spiritually they're sort of holding themselves elsewhere. Whereas we have these people who are physically separated from us, but they would like to be in. And it's a philosophical question that has so many practical ramifications. And I think that Bamidbar, throughout all these different narratives, keeps calling upon us to assess that, whether it's in the blanket, like women question, quote unquote, or it's in the much broader version of that exact same question that applies to so many people who are in compromised positions. So I just wanted to bring that because I think that it's such an important connection to that story and in general, what communities have to deal with.
Thank you for saying that, because that is, I think, perhaps why we need to conclude this Sefer. with Benot Tzlafchad. Because even if directly they don't bring in all those different ideas, like you could talk about an Anish to Israel, right? A person still, you try to make sure that someone who's poor still has our Brakosot Shel Yayin. This is not only resonating in our biblical narrative, this is resonating in our halachic narrative, the way in which we have a responsibility to hear it. Some actually, there is one mamar that Moshe Rabbeinu may have not been punished because of hitting the rock, but because he didn't hear, he should have known Benot Tzlafchad. He should have known the answer, right? Cain Benot Tzlafchad. Like, really? Like, of course include them. Of course. Like, often we say in halacha, like the real challenge is to say, should be to say, you have to work hard when someone has a shaila, it should pain you to say no, right? You need to work hard. It's too easy to say no. Don't say no. Like, look to see how you can say yes. Find ways to include the people. Think about also, if you even back to Vayikra, think about when you talk about exclusion, Aaron, right? What happens with Aaron when he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, it's like sometimes you have to opt out when you have pain in your life, right? You can't always be also like completely there, right? Everyone has their own narrative, and also with Lashon Hara, you're taking someone out of community, you're going to be taking it, right? So that all works out. But I think that the message of Lama Nigara was the question of Pesach Sheni. Lama Yigara was the question of Benot Tzlafchad. And even though they were Nogea Badavar, even though it affected them directly, they were doing it for their father, for the generation that came before. The generation going in is carrying the weight of what happened before, right? And making sure it is, here we're talking about Yerusha, but it could be anything you're talking about. How do you carry the responsibility of the generation before, and also the promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has promised you for your future, right? Your parents want you to have a future because they know that will be good for you in the future. Hashem promises that going forward. But at the same time, are you doing it because it was valuable to those who came before, right? So you have that back and forth, and I think that having that secure and stated well, and that memory of what they represent is critical, and that's where we come to Chazak, right? It's not only Chazak. It's not only Chazak that was given to Yoshua. There was Chazak that Benot Tzlafchad gave the people. It was Chizuk for Yoshua for leadership, but Benot Tzlafchad really set the people up. We don't hear them really complaining anymore, right? We know that there are difficulties, but we're not. They actually silence that skepticism. Moshe reminds them of it, but they silence the skepticism. They stood strong and didn't want to miss their connection, but it was courageous of what they did. And so much so that when we get to Yehoshua, if you look in Perek Yud Zayin, Pasuk Gimel through Vav, they come close again. Vatikrovna, and they go Elazar Kohen and Yehoshua. They say Elazar first. You remember Elazar Kohen, you were there. And yes, Yehoshua was one of the Nesiim, but you were there, and remember what you promised us. We are ready for our Nachala now. Like, even when you give Chizak, it's something you still have to go for. It's not going to be said. I think it's very fitting that in Baba Basra, Kuf Yud Tedamud Aleph, Chazal say, or it was an opinion of Rav Shimon Hashikmoni who said that Yodea ya Moshe Rabbeinu shebenot Tzlafchad yorshotein, aval lo haya Yodea im notlot chelek b'chara imlav. This is why it's right here. Right? They didn't know if they were entitled to take the portion of the firstborn of Chefer's portion, right, who came before their father. They didn't know. And they went before Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says, Uriyah haita Parshat Nachalot likatev al Yedei Moshe. And the Torah portion concerning the laws of inheritance was fit to have been written through, Hashem initiating a commandment to Moshe. Ela shezachu benot Tzelofchad v'nichtiva al yadan. Says Chazal, it was mentioned by mentioning it. Zachu benot Tzelofchad. They merited to have the portion written through them. If it means that they wrote it, if they mean that someone wrote it in their name. This last word, which I said I thought was really critical, this last word was Machla, Noah, Chagol, Milka, and Tirza's last word. Because the chizuk that they gave to the people, challenging the Jewish social protocol of inheritance, and the necessity, sure, of women having a voice in a place, sure, a message of inclusivity, that should not be lost on us, and appreciating that irrespective of gender, the catalyst was highlighting the importance of Eretz Yisrael for the Jewish nation. But they brought their case before Moshe Rabbeinu. The possibility of saying, I have a voice in this people is precious. It's not only about Eretz Yisrael, it's about you as a people, caring about laws, caring about the Torah, but to be active and act, to appreciate what is at stake if you don't, is necessary. And obviously, the anticipation, the positive anticipation, and the value they placed on the gift of Eretz Yisrael for our people, that's necessary. That was necessary for then, and it's necessary for us now. How do we see the bigger picture of being a people who require land? We require chachmaniyot to give eitzah, to give wise counsel, to remind us that even with our individual intelligent and creative voices, we need to gather together, unify, and we're stronger when we unite as a people. In America, we must continue to try to help out in ways that support the people in Israel and throughout the world. If it's through our questions that we ask our leadership that might seem personal, but really have great impact. That's the legacy of Benot Tzelofchad. Even with struggle, we can't lose sight of what it means to have a homeland. Look, the Jewish people in the Midbar, there was tragedy. People were dying. That generation died. But we have a promise to our foremothers and forefathers that there's a place that we're going to go that welcomes our people and our nation. And that voice is our survival. I was once told by an Israeli that brush in the kotel that withstands severe heat and immense cold, that greenery, it's called Tzelofchad. I never knew that. It's called Tzelofchad. Why? Because they said it stays strong and it perseveres, like our people and our land. And in many ways, Benot Tzelofchad, these chachmaniyot, by demonstrating such unwavering commitment, continue to teach us and show us. It's not, can I have? It's I want that land. I want that nachala. I want to be a part of it. When you encourage people and excite them toward that, it helps us survive as a people.
The only thing I'll add to that as we close our conversation is that I think that sometimes when we find ourselves fighting for something is when we discover what our values are. And if you mentioned, Menashe and Gad, etc., that they were focusing on their rechush, right, on their property, on the things that they owned. So it became very clear through the way that they spoke what their value was there. I mean, they might have also valued many other things, but it came through what they really were focusing on. And with Benot Tzelofchad, we also are very clear, right? They're focusing on the previous generation. They're focusing on honoring their father. They're also focusing, as it's very clear from everything we've spoken about, on having a place in Eretz Yisrael, being prepared for that and feeling like they have a place to call home there. And I think that one tip, I guess, we could take away in order to sort of put into practice more, I think, of what you're describing is that a lot of times we focus on the difference in outcome when if we would focus on the shared values, then we would see that there is a lot more that we could speak about, even if our outcome looks different or the way that we're choosing to live that value looks different, and that's okay. But sometimes it's dafka the shared value that can create connection between people in a way that's genuine. And it's not, feigning some commonality. It's finding, and a lot of times it's dafka through the fighting or through protests that we discover the things that are really most important to us that don't necessarily come out in a moment that's more peaceful or where the outcome is clearer or what's supposed to be or who's supposed to get what is clearer. So I think that is like a value clarification that also really happens in these kind of critical and painful moments that I think are being described here.
Beautiful.
I just really want to thank you again for coming on the podcast and speaking with us today about Benot Tzelofchad and also the undercurrent of the conversation, which is also, of course, touching upon all of which is happening all over the world. And yeah, really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Chazak, Chazak v'nitchazek. We come to the end of another wonderful series on the Matan Parsha podcast. This series focused on community, I really tried to speak with people from all over. I know that in reality, my geography kind of shifted between Israel, some leaders in the New York area, and we threw in a little bit of Paris in between. But I really did try and give us a bit of a sense of what different people are going through. Rav Dina sort of focused in this previous conversation about the importance of sort of seeing the unity, sort of connecting to the different plights that people are experiencing. It's not always an easy thing to do because very often when we're going through something difficult, we don't really want to see other difficulty. But I think that many of us really understand that there is a war happening on multiple fronts. And I kind of wanted to touch upon that through this sort of gentle Parsha kind of way that we do that. But so I hope that we were able to bring some of that into the conversation. The Devarim series will be comprised of a few parts. We'll open with a few episodes, and then I will be going on a bit of a vacation. And then we'll continue, of course, as the Chagim get closer this year. Devarim really goes all through September. So we'll be having mostly new episodes. For a few of them, I'll be bringing up from past years some episodes there as well. And the theme will be lessons we have learned from our teachers. And really in light of Moshe Rabbeinu and the teaching that he's doing, essentially they learned from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he's there really to teach Am Yisrael. Our guests will be sharing with us Torah that they have learned from their most influential teachers. So that will be the theme for the Devarim series. And I really thank everybody for being here and for continuing to learn with me, with us, with all of our guests, and looking forward to continuing with you for the book of Devarim. Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.